Okay.
So we are. Oh, yeah, now we're live. Okay, so let's begin. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, sure. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. My name is Hamza Reed. I am the Director of Operations at the Multicultural Center. And I'd like to welcome you all to our Family First Center's weekly webinar. This happens every Wednesday at 11 a.m. The format usually consists of a short presentation followed by a question and answer session at the end, where we will field different questions from the audience down in the chat box below. Today's topic is going to be the impact of abuse on self-esteem and self-image, and will be presented by Sister Saima Husaini. A little bit of info about Sister Saima. She's a licensed professional counselor supervisor with the state of Texas. She earned her bachelor's degree in communications from Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas, and has her master's degree in educational counseling from the University of Phoenix, Arizona in Phoenix, Arizona, obviously. After completing her graduate degree in Arizona, she's has experience with K-12 school guidance counselor in the state of Arizona, and has earned her extensive experience working inpatient at psychiatric hospitals, outpatient clinics, and in private practice working with adults, couples, and families. Currently, Sister Saima works in a group private practice at Hope and Harmony and is now a licensed social worker with Anissa Hope Center at Sakina Center. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Sister Saima.
Thank you, Brother Hamza, for that. And I'm happy to be here once again. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. And I guess, you know, this month is, October is the month of awareness for domestic abuse, domestic violence. So the topics this month have been great, and I think they're very educational. And I think I wanted to continue, obviously, with this last presentation for this month, talking about, you know, the impact of what abuse does on our self-esteem, our self-image. And a lot of the presentation is, or a lot of the research is geared towards women being abused. But of course, men face that same kind of thing as well. So I don't want to, you know, rule anybody out, but I'm just saying that a lot of the research and a lot of the studies are based on men battering women. And there's a lot of, you know, things for women that are available, women's shelters, places where women can seek help and try to escape their abusive partner. But anyway, with that said, I wanted to get ahead and go into the presentation and talk about how self-esteem and our self-image is impacted when there is abuse occurring. So let's see. What is, you know, we talk about self-image, self-esteem. What's the difference between that? Self-image basically is how we see ourselves. You know, what do I feel I look like? What do I feel my capabilities are? My, you know, my educational level. How do I interact? What are my qualities, my characteristics, my personality? What tendencies do I have? So that's kind of part of our self-image. And that, of course, we know can be negative or positive. Self-esteem is similar to that, but it's a little bit more on a deeper level, I guess. It's more of a sense of self. It's our value that we attach to ourselves, our own self-respect. What are we worth? You know, how much confidence do we have in who we are as people? So that's kind of like the differences a little bit between self-image and self-esteem. A lot of that is formed early on, you know, growing up in our childhood. A lot of it goes back to childhood, what our experiences were, what our family background was, our upbringing was like. Was it nurturing? Was it encouraging? Did we receive a lot of love and adoration from our primary caregivers, which is typically, your parents? And that shapes us to a certain extent, to quite an extent, actually. And so we have, a sense of, we feel good if we receive that positive nurturing and support. We feel secure, we feel safe, we feel like there's somebody there who loves us and unconditionally, and we feel that we can be ourselves and we'll still be loved, so we can be our authentic self. That's all great when we have that positive, encouragement and love and support growing up and throughout. What happens sometimes is when that's not present and we don't get that nurturing growing up, then that can also shape us, and we're left with different tapes, as we like to call them, if that play in our head. Not good enough, didn't do well enough. If you do well in school, if you make A's on your assignments, but there's a B, then the focus is on that B, not on the A's, so you're always being criticized. Whatever you've accomplished, you could have done better. So that starts to kind of, diminish our sense of self. Like, whatever I'm doing, I'm not being acknowledged, appreciated for. And so then that's where a lot of the negative impact on self-esteem occurs. So that's kind of the root of where, negative or positive self-image, self-esteem comes from, and how we tend to talk to ourselves. When we make a mistake, later in life, do we criticize ourselves? Are we very judgmental or harsh or critical about ourselves? And that often comes from a past of hearing that externally from other sources as well. So that's where that comes from. So, talking about the connection between self-esteem and domestic violence or abuse, it's not, according to Maria Phelps, she's a blogger with the movement against domestic violence. She stated that self-esteem alone cannot combat domestic violence. A woman with high self-esteem can still also be affected by violence. But she also said that women who have a better self-image may be a little bit more empowered to leave that relationship where that abuse is happening, because they feel that that image, that self-worth is there. They feel that they don't have to stay for this. So if there is an empowered sense of self, then he or she might be a little bit more likely to leave that abusive relationship. So it just really depends on where you are, where you're seeing yourself, and how much power and control you feel you have in that situation to make a change. Going back to shame and guilt, when we talk about, being told of what's good, what's not good, who we are is not good enough, or, that can really impact our sense of shame. And the difference between shame and guilt is that shame is more internalized, meaning, when something happens, you say to yourself, it's not that I did something wrong, it's I am wrong. It's more internalized, whereas guilt is more behavior-based. Guilt says, well, I've made a mistake, or I made a bad decision. So it's more about choices and not about who you are as a person. And shame internalizes that. And we feel shameful and we want to keep that within us. We don't want to show that part of us. We feel we can't be authentic in that way. And so that silence that comes with shame and that secrecy and that fear of judgment can lead to somebody more susceptible to be in an abusive relationship. So if your sense of self is already diminished for whatever reason, you might be more susceptible to stay in or become involved in an abusive relationship. So these, like silence, secrecy, and judgment, are, like it says, the hallmarks of abusive relationships, because abusers tend to reinforce that. They gain their own sense of power and control when they minimize, ridicule, humiliate somebody in the victim role. And so that just reinforces your own negative self-talk. When you're being told that again, it's reinforcing that, and it just becomes into this vicious cycle of manipulation and control. So that's why oftentimes people stay stuck in those relationships, because they don't know how to get out of it. So, abusers, they thrive on that sense of control and that power that they feel. They themselves have their own insecurities. And there's, different things that happen in relationships that have abusive power imbalances, which is what this talks about. Basically, that abusive relationship is where there is an extreme power imbalance, where the victim feels emotionally, mentally, physically unsafe and helpless and trapped. And the abuser, again, like I said, they ridicule, they blame the victim, and that again reinforces those feelings of worthlessness, powerlessness, and defeat. So what do we call abuse? I mean, people think about domestic violence and think about physical abuse. And that's not necessarily the only thing that abuse consists of. Abuse can consist of mental abuse, emotional, financial, sexual. So these are all different categories of abuse that can occur in a relationship. And we have to be aware of what that looks like. Oftentimes I hear women say, or people say, men or women, that, well, he or she didn't really send me to the hospital, so it wasn't that bad, or he or she they didn't really hit me. They were just, it just becomes very verbally aggressive. But that's still abuse, name calling, cursing, profanity, all of these things, when you're saying that to somebody, that's abuse, and that's damaging to a person's sense of self. So we have to be aware of how we define abuse. We think about, well, he didn't put it, or he or she didn't put his hands on me. So, it's not really that abusive. But that's, we're justifying that. We're trying to make ourselves feel that it's not really abuse because he's not hitting me or she's not hitting me. And so we have to change that mindset. So like I said, it's that power imbalance. And oftentimes it's about, in abuse, we often fall into these patterns where abuse is happening and we maybe on some level recognize it, but then we are kind of faced with what's called gaslighting. And gaslighting is when the other person makes you feel that what you're thinking is not accurate. You start to have self-doubt. Like, okay, well, I think that was kind of insulting, but then the other person saying, well, that's not an insult. I didn't mean to insult you. And you're just making that up, or you're just overreacting. And so that's what we call gaslighting, making you feel like what is happening is not actually what's happening. So you have that, you start to doubt your sense of reality. Like, am I going crazy? Am I making this up? Am I overreacting? And that also keeps you in that pattern of, victim and staying in that relationship, because you're thinking, well, maybe it isn't so bad. Maybe, he or she is right. Maybe I am overreacting. So we stay stuck in that mindset. So there's, in abusive relationships, there tends to be stages of abuse. The first one is the tension building, where, it's slowly happening. Things are being said, tension is increasing, there's no communication happening. There's a lot of maybe snide comments or remarks that keep happening, insults that are being thrown out here and there. So it just keeps building and festering, and then the resentment that's starting to grow, and certain actions, every little thing is being maybe nitpicked. There's a lot of blame happening. So this is just the kind of a precursor to that incident that's going to happen, where it's going to blow. It's going to become a fight. It's going to become verbally abusive or physically aggressive, and that's what abuse is, and that's what happens. And so after that happens, a lot of times, kind of going back to that gaslighting idea, is that the reconciliation happens. The abuser may apologize, say, I'm sorry, I love you, I didn't mean it, I will never do that again, make all these empty kind of promises. And it's this vicious cycle that keeps happening. And then there's a calm. And then you start to think, okay, well, maybe it's okay. Maybe I'll be better. Maybe he'll change. Maybe she'll change. And it's just vicious cycle that kind of keeps repeating itself. So those are the different stages of abuse. And so each of these stages keeps that victim under the abuser's control. And that's what they want. They want to stay there. They want the victim to stay in that place of, where they're questioning their reality, where they're questioning their experience, and they're not going to step out, because that's the only way they can maintain that control. And again, in this whole process, your sense of self is diminished. Your self-esteem is, you're not feeling that you're worthy. You may not feel that you deserve any better, because you start to believe the blames and the accusations that are being made. So you stay in that negative pattern. Interestingly enough, there's two kinds of abusers that Dr. Gottman had and Dr. Jacobson wrote a book called When Men Batter Women. And in this book, they did a lot of research and studies and showed that there's two kinds of abusers. One that they call the cobra. They call them that because these are those people who remain calm and with little or no physiological response to situations. They can be basically becoming aggressive, but when they did their research, they monitored, their heart rate, their pulse rate, and saw that there was really no response to that emotion buildup. And it's more of like that antisocial temperament. And it is disturbingly almost, they remain cool and calm and calculated, like a cobra, like it stays calm and still before it attacks. So that's what is one type of an abuser. The other one is what they called a pit bull. They're more bullish. They lack the ability to control their anger and emotions. They're more heated and they're more aggressive in their arguments. And so the pit bull is more somebody who is actually a little bit more dependent. They need to feel that power and control more. And so they become more, they can't control their emotions when it starts to build up. So a couple of things I want to go over about that is with cobras, they can remain, like I said, calm internally while they're battering, and they can stay cool and calculated and not exhibit any kind of emotion. Whereas the counterpart, the pit bull, is more aggressive, and it's more, he or she is more, you can see it, you can see the buildup happening in them. Pit bulls are more emotionally dependent on their partner. They often can exhibit things like jealousy. They can feel insecure. They want to control and know about whereabouts, like where are you going? Why are you going? Who are you going with? They need to know these because their sense insecurity is more prevalent than a cobra. Because cobras typically don't have any fear of abandonment. They want to control, but they don't show it. They don't feel that it's needed to be, they don't want to show their insecurity in that way. Also, let's see what else they say. So the cobra is hard to walk away from because of, you don't know what's coming. You don't know what to expect from a person who's like a cobra. So they're harder to leave, but in the long run, it's probably better that you are far away from that person as possible, because there is the potential for anything. That person can, go as far as really physically harming you or even worse. And same thing with a pit bull. They can be easier to leave initially, but with their dependent kind of nature, sometimes they draw the person back into the relationship. Like, I'm sorry, I need you. You get all those apologies from somebody like a pit bull. So it's harder to leave, in the long run. You keep getting drawn back in. So these are some differences in the types of abusers that are out there to be aware of. So if you see these kinds of signs or behaviors, you kind of know what you're looking for and what you're dealing with. And there's a lot of, like I said, a lot of research on this. And if you have, more interest in this kind of information, it's definitely out there. And I really recommend that book, When Men Batter Women, by Dr. Jacobson and Dr. Gottman. It gives a lot more detailed information on this topic. So, what happens when abuse is happening, when the victim, like when they are in this pattern, what is going on to them? How do they cope with this? How do they live their lives in this relationship that seems to be, they're stuck and they don't know what to do. They can't, they're fearing for their lives sometimes. They don't feel worthy. They feel helpless. And so how do they cope? A lot of times, the victim learns to dissociate. And what that means is kind of they feel numb. It's our way of disconnecting from our reality. When that abuse is happening and you're in the middle of it, your brain kind of takes you away. You're not there anymore. You're numb to it. So you disassociate. And that's a way to cope. It's not going to help you leave that situation, but it helps you mentally leave the moment. So you don't, it's our way of protecting ourselves. Of course, these kinds of things lead to addiction. all sorts of addiction. Addiction serves as, again, another escape from a negative situation that you're in. So addiction, as far as, it could be alcohol, drugs, eating, it could be any kind of addiction that serves to give you that release for the moment. It's a momentary fix. Again, not a long-term goal, not a long-term solution. Anxiety increases. We're fearful. Our stress response, like I think I mentioned in a couple of webinars before, our anxiety and our stress response is there because it's built in. It's a built-in system to protect us from danger. When we are feeling a threat of some sort, that's supposed to activate, and we're supposed to fight, flight, or freeze, right, to protect us. And when we're in this kind of a relationship, we're always on edge. We don't know what's coming. So that stress response is on high alert all of the time. And we just, so we're easily triggered. We're having panic attacks because it's that uncertainty, the feeling, the fear of the unknown, like what to expect when I walk in the door. What do I expect when that person walks in the door? I don't know, like if something I did today is going to trigger that person. So that is always, a severe result of abuse. Depression, things like that negative self-talk, feeling worthless, isolating, not wanting to be around friends or family because we are afraid of what they might say. That judgment, that secrecy, keeps us from wanting to interact with people. We don't want, what will they say? What will somebody say? What will my friends or family say if they find out that I'm in this horrible situation with my partner? So that leads to depression, that isolation, and you don't want to, your motivation is down the drain to do anything. And then of course, the biggest thing is PTSD. Once we're able to, at some point, hopefully leave the situation, you're going to have flashbacks, you're going to have trauma. The slightest kind of loud sound or somebody raising their voice in some situation will trigger those memories and experiences that you had. And so you have, symptoms of PTSD when having been exposed or being in an abusive relationship. So these are the negative effects of that can be, long-term effects of being in an abusive relationship. Of course, there's therapy, there's help to seek, help for these kinds of things. You can go to, any kind of, there's a lot of support groups, there's shelters, there's inpatient, outpatient, settings where you can seek help and help work through these kinds of things that have happened because of the abusive relationship. And, and again, when talking about the abuse, the impact of the abuse on yourself, once a person is able to leave that relationship, you often think, what was I thinking? How did I stay in that for so long? So there's all these feelings of shock and grief after you recognize that you've been in this abusive, violent relationship. How did I let myself get there? Our sense of self, again, is like, I hear a lot of people say, well, I used to be this strong, independent person. I don't understand how this started, and the thing is, again, you don't get into a relationship knowing that this is going to be an abusive relationship, right? It doesn't just happen on the first few times you meet that person. It's going to build over time. And sometimes it takes months or well into, after you've gotten into a more permanent relationship with that person. It might start off with, like I said, like, having the abuser wanting to know every single thing about what you're doing, what you're not doing, who you're doing it with, showing extreme jealousy, not being okay with you going out with friends because they want to control your time, so these things, you don't see them right off the bat. You think, oh, they're so, oh, they might be a little bit possessive, or, oh, they like for us to spend time together. So you don't see that as abuse, but as it grows down the road, you find yourself that now, before you know it, you're in this relationship and you didn't even recognize the signs in the first place. So that shock happens afterwards, after we, acknowledge and say, okay, I need to be out of this relationship. And that grief, of how I lost myself, my sense of self has been, manipulated and lost in this process. And then that's where those, feelings of anger towards yourself come in, that sense of a loss of control. Like, I lost my say, I lost my voice, I lost my identity. And so you feel angry towards yourself for letting yourself get to that position. And of course, a loss of trust in people. You get into a relationship trusting that this person cares about me, loves me. So you question your judgment. How did I not see this happening? So and then you doubt, in the future, if I have friendships or other relationships, how do I know that I'm not going to be in that same situation again? So that sense of trust in people is also diminished because of this. Self-loathing, self-hate, again, depression, the sense of powerlessness, the lack of confidence in yourself, all of those things are a result of that loss of self-esteem and self-image being in that abusive relationship, and that loss of identity, like I said earlier. But on the other hand, healing can happen. Like I said, there's a lot of resources and places where a person who's being abused can seek help. And it takes time. You don't have to go at anybody's pace. There's not a set time that, oh, you should be over this by now. It's going to take you whatever amount of time to heal from this. It's going to take for you to re-identify and redraw your boundaries, like really kind of think about what is okay with me, what kind of behavior in my relationships am I willing to be okay with, what is acceptable, what things are those red flags that I need to be more mindful of and not ignore or overlook when I get into another relationship down the road, if and when that happens. So kind of restructuring your sense of boundaries is important also. Forgiving yourself, it happens, like earlier in the presentation where, even women or men with high self-esteem can fall victim into these kinds of relationships. It's nobody's above it. It can happen to any of us and we don't even see it coming sometimes. So being able to forgive yourself that this was something that's happened. I can't keep blaming myself for that situation. It wasn't something I did wrong. It was that other person who had their own issues and insecurities and behavior that was unacceptable. That's on them. That was not on me. So not blaming yourself for that. Again, knowledge is power. Learning more about it, learning about what abuse is, not kind of overlooking those slight comments, thinking, well, he's not so bad or she's not so bad. Abuse is abuse, and we have to call it for what it is. So understanding what it is going to help, prevent you from being in those situations. And then take back your story, discover who you are, find yourself again. Who is, what are your interests and likes and dislikes? You are an individual and you have value. So recognize that and be okay with it and recover from that and take your time with it. Like I said, examining how you see yourself. I am not defined by this circumstance. I am more than this circumstance. Be patient, have self-compassion. A lot of times we're so self-critical. I often tell clients, when they struggle with something like this or low self-esteem, I often ask them, like, if you have a really close friend that you care about and they are struggling with something similar like what you are, what would you tell them? If somebody's saying to you, gosh, I just can't accomplish anything, I'm just so bad at all of this, and they're just really talking negative about themselves, what would you say to them? I think most of the time we would be encouraging. We'd be like, no, try again, you can do this. We'd be motivating, we would be compassionate, we would be encouraging and nurturing. So basically, self-compassion talks about doing the same thing, but to yourself. Take it away from the self-criticism, the self-loathing, the negative self-talk. Be compassionate to yourself. It's okay. We make mistakes. We're human. We can have bad judgment calls. It doesn't make us a bad person. Spending your time with people who are positive in your life, people who are supportive and who are there for you and who love you unconditionally. Surround yourself with that, to help you build that sense of value, and knowing that you are valuable, engaging in things for self-care, doing things for yourself, taking time to, whether it's exercise, whether it's, engaging in a hobby that you enjoy. Just spending time to do the things that you enjoy is a good thing. It's encouraged, because that's not being selfish. That's just you being kind to yourself. And that's highly needed. And then, at the end of the day, if you're able to, give back. There's so many people who may be or have been in your situation that you just worked yourself, and you've worked through it, and you've gained that strength and that self-confidence back. So give back, help somebody else who might be struggling in that situation. Show them and tell them that they're valued, that they can do this. There is something better out there for them. They have choices. And give back and educate those people that might be struggling as well. I often like to, also tell my clients that, think of yourself, if you take any kind of like a dollar bill, right? $5 bill, and you can crumple it up, you can step on it, you can make it dirty, mark all over it, and it becomes, doesn't look very nice. But at the end of the day, you can unfold it, straighten it out, and still take it to the store. It's still a $5 bill. It still holds value. And no matter what you've gone through, no matter what you've been told by people, by your partner, by your, unfortunately, some like family members, you hold value as a human being. We hold value, we hold self-worth, and we can't ever forget that. And so that's why self-esteem is so important to maintain and rebuild after being in abusive, relationships, because they try to put you down. But as long as you can remember that you hold value, I think hopefully you'll be able to get through this on the other side. So that's all I got.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Saima, for that very important and concise presentation. I like the way how you ended it with the $5 bill and holding value. That's very important. So now we will begin our question and answer session. Again, if you have any questions, please answer or ask them at the chat below, whether that's on Zoom or on Facebook. But I will start with a first question. How do you know if you're being abused?
Well, it's hard to know at first, right? It's hard. You think that that person is overly concerned about your well-being, when they're asking you, hey, so, what time are you going to be back? And tell me where you're going. Put your location on so I can make sure I know where you are. And you're thinking, oh, wow, this person really, really cares and is really concerned about my well-being. So sure, I'll do that. No problem. Right. And then it starts off little by little by that, or they might say something like, oh, you're going to go spend time with your family again, or, oh, you're going to go spend time with your friends again. I'm going to feel so lonely. What am I going to do without you? And you're thinking, oh my gosh, this person just really wants to be with me, right? But these are red flags. These are like, why, is it so necessary for us to be 100% together 24/7 all the time? That's a red flag. And because in a healthy relationship, it's always encouraged that, yes, you're two individual people who have friends, families, likes, dislikes, which you can, do independent of each other. And that's okay. That's a sense of security that one ideally should have in their relationship. You go do your thing, I'll do my thing. But at the end of the day, I know we're solid, we're connected. We don't have to prove anything to each other. So kind of being aware of that. When you see these things, these red flags, kind of be mindful of that. It's like, okay, that's odd. Why is that happening? And maybe ask a close friend that you trust. Like, is that something that you experience too, or is that just me? So it's okay to talk about it too, not let that shame take over and that fear of judgment take over.
Very good. What are some ways to maintain a positive self-image while still living under the threat of abuse? Is it possible?
That's a tricky one, because it really depends on how confident you are going into that relationship about yourself. A lot of times, if there's been a history of neglect, of abuse, maybe in childhood, maybe with family members, other relationships in the past, it can diminish your sense of self and your self-confidence. And then it's like that vicious cycle. We fall into that pattern, and then we gravitate towards abusive relationships, because initially they'll start off, we're looking to feel connected with somebody. We're wanting to feel loved and wanted by somebody. And that's what happens when we initially see that, what is actually control. We see it as, oh, that person really wants me around. And we're needing that. So we get into that relationship. And so if our sense of confidence is already diminished, it's hard to maintain it or build it up, but it also, in that quote by that the one blogger that said that it's not just if you have a high self-esteem, you're not susceptible to, an abusive relationship. It can happen, even if we are confident individuals, we can fall into those patterns unknowingly. And it's sometimes it's I think education and awareness is important to know and recognize what is a healthy relationship and what isn't. And, being firm in your boundaries, what's okay, what's not okay, what kind of behavior is acceptable, what's not. And the minute you start to sense or gauge that feeling, and only you can recognize it, like, wait a second, this isn't really sitting well with me. I'm not really okay with this. Listen to that. That's your internal voice telling you something, like, this behavior that I'm experiencing is not okay. And if you can listen to it, then that self-esteem will help you, like, I don't deserve this. I don't need to subject myself to this. If you can recognize that and use that voice to keep you from continuing it, then I think that can be helpful.
Very good. There are many in our community, speaking about Muslim community, who are trained at an early age to learn about the benefit of putting other people in front of your own needs, your children or your spouse or other family members. Is that healthy, and how can you maintain a balance?
Yeah, so it's a mindset, I think, in different communities, different societies, that's different. There's individualistic societies, there's societies which focus on the group kind of mentality. So, it's less about self, it's more about others. So it's a cultural thing also. But, I think I like to encourage people to think about, if I'm not okay, how can I be okay for the other people in my life? It's kind of like that airplane example. It's like, you got to put your own oxygen mask on first before you can help your kids or help your spouse or parents or whatever. You have to be okay. And again, it's hard sometimes for people to separate that from being selfish. It's not being selfish if you're taking care of yourself. It's not selfish if you're saying, you know what, I can't do everything for everybody all of the time. It's not humanly possible. It leads to possible resentment, it leads to burnout, it leads to conflict. And so it's okay to listen and express those boundaries to people in a respectful way. You don't have to be rude about it. We talked about at one point codependency, like, you don't have to be the enabler to everybody and do everything for everyone. You can help people, you can be there for people, but you can set a limit, like, I can do this much and I'm happy to do this much, and know that this is what my boundary is.
And finally, how does negative self-image manifest itself differently from men and women?
That's a good one. I think if you have a negative self-image, I feel that, there's these certain expectations as society that we have, the gender roles, the typical kind of gender roles for men and women. And we expect men to be those stereotypical, the providers, the breadwinners. They can handle it all. They don't need to show any emotion because they're strong, And if a man has a negative sense of self, I think it can come out as a lot of anger. It can, because it's aggression then, right? And for a man to be aggressive is like, oh, okay, he's a man. These are, again, stereotypical mindsets that we have. So for a man, it can come out that sense of insecurity, the negative self-talk. They want to be in control. They want to feel powerful as a man. And so it can come out in those kinds of negative ways, being isolated, not willing to show emotion, are all kind of examples of when there's negative self-talk. You don't want to be vulnerable. Like the idea of being vulnerable for a man is really hard. And by vulnerability, I mean not that it's a weakness to be vulnerable, but being able to be your authentic self, to be able to say, you know what, I'm struggling. This is hard for me. I don't know what to do. For men, typically that's very difficult, and they feel like they need to put on a front, a mask, to present to everybody, I got this, you know, I'm good. And for women, on the other hand, I think to a certain extent, those kind of expectations are also there for a woman to be able to look good, be a great wife, be a great mom. If you want to work. If you're in the workplace, be able to still be the great wife, be the great mom, still have it together, you know, be there for your family, extended family, in-laws, and keep it all together. And if you're feeling that low self-esteem, like I can't do this, I don't know how I'm going to keep managing this, you know, that can come, that's where I think a lot of the, you know, for women, I think anxiety builds for women. I think, you know, that low self-esteem, that negative self-talk, it just leads to a sense of, you know, I think women disconnect sometimes, and they don't want to show weakness, but they, you know, it's harder I think women in general are more emotional. So you'll see, you know, maybe depression more so, you know, in women, maybe, you know, they'll feel a lot of more frustration when they can't be the mom that they think they need to be for their kids, when it becomes overwhelming, you know, and so they're not meeting the expectations, and I think it just diminishes, again, it just further diminishes the sense of self.
Very good. I'd like to end there. Then I'd like to sincerely thank Sister Saima for her important presentation, and thank you all for tuning in to our Family First Center's weekly webinar. Be sure to meet us again each week, where we'll be discussing a different topic every Wednesday at 11 a.m. So Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.